I also need to admit that until a year ago, I didn't like democracy. For me, it was like a mainstream left side bubble. Democracy is something like, yeah, it's better than dictatorship or something, obviously. But democracy is not the best. So there are better frameworks, but we just don't know them yet. And as I'm studying philosophy, and this is also a disclaimer probably at the beginning, I wrote my bachelor thesis about radical democracy, and for me, the basic statement of this whole talk is that being agile is very, very similar to being democratic. And so the talk today is also a bit intense, so be aware of that. What I came up is that I'm in the Agile quite some time already, and I always had the feeling there is a magic inside. There's much more than just a strategy, a method, whatever for developers, but there's something more I felt very connected to. And when I came into contact with Castoriadis, which is one of the philosophers I had the contact with the democracy concepts, I realized, okay, this is one of the connections I can see. And what I want to do now, the next half an hour, is to move you through these concepts so that you probably also get a better understanding how those two things are connected and where you can use one thing in the other way around. So, when I take up this topic with people I'm usually talking about, the first thing is that they say, but Agile is for small teams. I guess that's not so much the case here in this conference, but especially when you talk with developers, they say, no, Agile is for small teams, it's a small technique, it doesn't have to do anything with the big organizations, and this is not what I'm talking about, at least that's not what I mean when I talk about Agile here. So that's not the thing. What I'm talking about is, or what I understand as Agile, is more like what Alistair Cockburn was saying. He's also one of the co-authors of the manifesto, and he said that this has nothing to do with software. I consider it an accident of history that a group of programmers decoded this particular thing. And 5 years ago, he created the heart of Agile. Who knows that? This one. Great, one person. And he said, everything in this Agile world is way too complex and we overcomplicated this whole stuff. Basically, it's about reflect, improve, collaborate, and deliver. So that's the simple thing. And this is the direction I also think my understanding of Agile is going. I could probably talk half an hour. I did 3 years ago, actually here, I talked about my understanding of Agile half an hour. But for simplicity, I just take that one. So the next topic is when I talk about Agile and democracy is very similar, so they're connected somehow. We know we have a feeling now what Agile means, or what I think Agile means, and now the next question is what is democracy? And that's also a huge topic. I had a discussion with, I don't think she's here, during lunch about democracy. She studied political science, and she questioned, yeah, from which angle do you approach this Agile and democracy thing, and does it? Yeah, for me, it's about, and we will go into that later, but it's basically about radical democracy. And when I talk with people about democracy, they either have this feeling of, yeah, it's cool, it's freedom, so I can decide on my own what I want to do, or they sometimes have this feeling it leads to tyranny of the majority often. So this is what Tocqueville was also coming up. What Castoriadis is doing, and I like that, is that he goes to the base of the term. So this is ancient Greek, demokratia. Demos are the people, and gratia, kratos, is rule, power. So basically it means that people rule, people have the power. The thing is that it doesn't say anything about how this happened. When you think about democracy, it just means that all the people have the power, that all the people rule. But it doesn't mean that every person needs to vote on a certain question or something. So it's a thing, how do you apply this? How do you bring this into practice? And that what we are talking about. And so take a simple question I forgot to ask. And so I was thinking about, okay, when we have lunch today, should we eat beef, beans, or chocolate? So this is a common question. Did we have beans today? Does anyone know? No beans? No beans? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was in such an intense discussion that I even didn't make this choice. I didn't even ask myself. So reality brought me back because I was in a discussion and we just took the first line, which was there, which was pork, which I would never have chosen if I would consciously think about it. And but when I ask this question in a context like this, not when we're reflecting on what we are actually doing, but when I ask people, then so who would go for chocolate? Okay, great. Who would go for beef? Okay, who would go for the beans? That's interesting. So I did this question also with a lot of my friends, and more than half of the people go for the beans. And why? Because we have a climate crisis and they are all very aware of the carbon footprint, and they say, yeah, beef is not that good with the carbon footprint. You know, even if you have low impact produced beef, it's still very, very much higher than if you just go to the beans. Beans are healthy, they have a lot of protein, they have basically no impact on, or very low impact, so they're good. So I was thinking about, okay, when we have a democracy and people can rule, then we can say, okay, we are just allowed to eat beans anymore. No beef, no chocolate. And probably some people of you will have a bad gut feeling. That's good, keep that. We will come to that. So what I do as a as a philosopher, as a scientist, what I do is that I have a bigger, so I really try to understand, okay, what is influencing our food choices? We call this social cultural influences. And the climate crisis, which is actually about the carbon footprint, is one part of the environmental driver. But there are also a lot of other drivers which influences what we eat. Like for me today, I was in a discussion, it was the first food I could get. I didn't choose anything, it was like the first thing was coming there, I ate. There's another nice story that when you're in dim environments, you eat less healthy. So we could think about that we should forbid candlelight dinners because people eat unhealthy, and as a society, of course, we want healthy food. We want to have healthy people, so we have less costs in the medicine and in the hospitals. The thing is, our society is complex, you probably know that, but the thing is that a lot of our policies and rules are designed for simple or complicated environments, and that doesn't work. It still happens in the politics, like when we have decisions like with masks wearing. I don't know how it's here in Lithuania, in Germany and Austria, it was really a huge thing, so everybody were forced to wear masks. And the idea is good because from the point of science, it totally makes sense to wear masks. You know if you wear masks correctly, and you have the distance, and you're washing your hands, then you're pretty much safe against COVID. But the thing is that in reality, there are so many influencing factors and stuff which is coming together that doesn't work. And what it leads to in the end is that people are divided in our society and fighting each other and say, yeah, you have to wear masks, and no, I'm free, I can decide over my body. Yeah. So again, not such a good idea. So the question is, how should we do this? This is, by the way, Castoriadis, and I think this is his typical phase. He was very frustrated over humanity and what happened. And he was also a very huge critic, actually, of the type of democracy we are currently living in. He said representative democracy is not so good. And what he did is that he was working in the OECD, so as an economist most of his time, but he was also a professor of philosophy. And he had also a background as a psychotherapist in psychoanalysis. And he put his three things together and wrote several books. And one of his major books is basically this imaginary institution of society. And there he analyzed how the world works. And I really liked that when I go through. It's not an easy read. So I took the course on the university. And as in philosophy, you always have to read the text 20 times before you understand a single thing. But he also, after all of his analyzings, he came to the point that democracy is the only effective type of organization for a society to work. And that is a hard claim. So I wrote my bachelor thesis about democracy from his point of view. And basically he has, and that's what I'm sharing now with you, so basically he has three key concepts. Of course, there's much more, and I would like to share it with you, but I have 67 slides, I think, and I hope that I will do it in time. So I just share the three major, the key concepts. And the first one is autonomy. When I ask people, I would have liked to ask you, what do you think autonomy is, but too much content, so I don't do. But I asked other people what they think autonomy is, and people on the streets usually combine it with freedom, or I can do what I want. When I ask C-levels or CEOs or something, they say, yeah, no pressure from the hierarchy, just leave them alone and they will do the thing. Usually that doesn't work, by the way. So if you have a company, you are a CEO and you try to get agile and just do it by letting the people alone, you can save 2 years of bad experiences, and don't do it. I had a workshop with 20 agile coaches a few weeks ago, and I asked them, so they are professionals, and they said 80% of them agreed on it, something like self-determination, so that we can decide on, or you can decide on what you want to do. And that's already pretty close, but it's still half of the truth. And this half of the truth is the reason, in my opinion, why so many autonomous teams fail. I'm going back to Kant because he's the first person who basically implemented or came up with the concept of autonomy, at least who made it popular. And he writes, yes, subject only to laws given by himself, but still universal. That sounds complicated. So make it easy. So the first part is subject only to laws given by himself is self-determination. So I can decide, I can give myself my own rules. But this still universal, this is a bit more. Because I think no philosopher who wrote about autonomy says, yeah, you can just decide on your own, and you can ignore the environment and society and other people. Just decide for your own. That doesn't work like that. So Kant came up and tried to understand, okay, how this connection between the society and between myself, how can we handle this? And he said, Naya, so just think about universality. If there are 10 euros on the floor, and I ask myself, can I just grab them and pick them up and put it in my pocket? Is that good? Is that okay? And then I can think, okay, what would happen if other people would be in this situation? I'm fine if they take the 10 euros and put them in the pocket. If yes, then great. If not, then not. So when you know autonomous teams who are working against the goals of the organization, then I'm pretty sure that they are usually either not thinking about the organization, so they work, I'm comfortable if I'm just doing my development stuff, but I don't care what the CEO wants or what the marketing team wants or what the other development team wants. Or they have a missing communication, so they are not even aware what the other people are knowing. Both are problems you can solve. But that's basically about autonomy. But as I was saying, I'm coming up with the concept of Castoriadis and not of Kant, so there was some changes or some additional insights, I would say. There were basically in philosophy in the last 200 years, two major turns. I think they're very important. The first one is the linguistic turn, so that means that we understood that language creates our reality. This is, I guess, pretty known already, so just a short who believes that language creates our reality? So that's at least some people. Yeah. So this is something which comes into the popular opinion, I would say, over some time. A newer term was the cultural turn, so that you understand that culture produces and creates your reality. This is not even introduced in some scientific fields, so they still ignore that culture is very important. And before I go into the term of autonomy for Castoriadis, I have to introduce a new term. It's called the imaginary institution, which is also part of the title. I make it simple. Imaginary is imagination. So I can imagine that we all start to dance right now, but of course it is not happening right now. Institution means a very complex term, but basically it means how one behaves. So what are the patterns? What are the culture? What happens? So when I'm coming into a new company, how do I introduce myself? Do I say, hi Martin, how are you? Or do I say, good morning, Mr. Johnson? So there's completely different behavior, and this happens all the time in every culture, in every group, in every team, with yourself. It's always different, and the thing is that you can imagine your behavior, so that you can think of creatively how you want to behave. And autonomy, in terms of Castoriadis, is that you create explicitly your self-institution. Okay, so that's again quite complex, but what it means basically is that you explicitly create how do you want to behave. And this is, in my opinion, what we do, at least what I do in the retrospectives all the time. So we think about, okay, how do we behave? Does it make sense? Should we work differently? Should we talk with the user, with the customer? Should we invite some stakeholders to some meetings because then we are more efficiently? So that's the third thing. And that's basically autonomy on a simple level. Hope you got it. Who got it? Oh, that's more than the 80% from Pierre. So basically, people can give them their own rules, their own behavior, and they reflect on it. That's the idea. But autonomy is the answer. And the question is, what is the question? Why do we need autonomy? And there we have alienation. That's a term from social science. Who knows alienation, what it means? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, one, okay. Two. It's a very abstract term, actually, and if you understand it, at least for me, it explains so many things in life. Most of the problems are coming from, or many problems coming from alienation. And I tried to explain it in a simplified version, but I guess I thought it's a good idea to do it like that so you have an understanding, is that you have time and you have consciousness, a level of consciousness, and over time, usually you increase your consciousness. So when you're a baby, you don't know how the world works. But over time, you understand that when you speak into a microphone, that sometimes the voice is louder, that when you sit on a chair, it's more comfortable, that when you're standing 12 hours a day. So you get an understanding how the world works. And usually you have problems. And what people are doing when they have problems is that they react on the problem. And so they create a behavior, an imaginary institution. And over time, they keep this behavior, but the level of consciousness is changing, so increasing usually. And what happens there is that you have a distance between what you do and what makes sense. All of the Agile coaches and Scrum Masters, most of the Agile coaches and Scrum Masters I know, this is the biggest problem they experience in companies, that when you ask people, why are you doing this? Yeah, because we always did it like that. Yeah, but it doesn't make sense anymore because we know that we can do it way better. You can apply this like when you learn something in childhood, but you're still listening to your parents when you're 40, which probably is not the most reasonable anymore. But you also can apply it to business, for example. So we see here the price of batteries. So in the early 90s, you had more than $7,500 per kilowatt hour, but over time it dropped a lot. Tesla, oops, too slow. So Tesla was created in 2003, I think, and they realized at that time, okay, economically it's viable now to produce electronic cars. It's not that electronic cars were not, nobody knew about it. I mean, even in the 90s, there were the small cars, so a lot of devices were driven by electronic batteries, but it was not viable for the private car industry, for the automotive industry. And there was a possibility of the disruption because a lot of people were still acting with normal fuel cars, but Tesla, at least the founders, were realizing that there is a gap now and that we can go into this market and create electronic cars and they will be viable. And at that time, nobody was thinking about that this can be the most valuable company of Earth. The question is why all the other automotive companies were ignoring this or didn't have a bet on it. And the thing is, I was working even in the automotive company, so I know some people, and they're not stupid. So they are pretty smart people, and they are experts, I would say. And when we go to Daniel Kahneman, he was also in his book writing about expert knowledge and what does that mean. And there are 3 constraints, basically, what you need to be an expert. You need to have many and quick feedback loops, you need to have a stable environment, and you don't need to get comfortable. So the people I get to know in the industry, they did not get comfortable. So they were really interested in stuff. They really learned a lot of new things. And they were also getting many and quick feedback loops. At least since the Toyota production system, when people went out on the streets and they talked and interviewed people there, that they knew what people want. They were really targeting their cars for the people. So that was working great. But the thing is, with the stable environment, there is no stable environment in general. Just don't believe that there is a stable environment. At least as long as we are humans and you see humans as humans, there are no stable environments in interaction with humans. You can reduce the complexity of the world, which makes sense from time to time, especially if you're working in factories, but in general, there are no stable environments. So the experts were trained from past knowledge that batteries so electronic cars are not viable on the market, but that has changed, and nobody were aware of that, apart from some people. It was not just Tesla, there were many startups actually who were concerned with that, but most of the big companies like General Motors, Volkswagen ignored what's happening there, or just, let's have a look what's happening there. So again, experts are working usually just in simple and complicated environments. Their expert knowledge works, but it doesn't work in complex and in chaotic environments. And when we are handling and when we are working in like a democracy on a society level, the stuff is often complex and chaotic.
Seen from another point of view, it gives quite a different impression. But it's only when you get the whole picture you can fully understand what's going on.
It was one of the most famous ads in history, and what it said is that you just have to get all of the perspectives to understand a certain context. And experts are not enough. That doesn't mean that experts are useless. So experts are very, very useful resource, but they are not enough. You need to get all of the understandings. You need I've called it swarm intelligence, but don't care about the term. What it means basically is that when you want to solve a certain problem or you have a certain topic, that you need all the perspectives you can get. And this is what happens in democracy, because you get involve every person to have a look on a certain problem. And what we're doing, and simplify it, we're doing this with Agile. So, second term. Last one is way easier, luckily. So he analyzed how people act. So what are the universal spheres of acting of humanity, he called it. He analyzed it from the ancient Greek democracy, Athenian democracy, and he said, yeah, there's this private sphere, the oikos. It's basically the family. So when you're at home, when you garden, when you talk with your brother or whatever, this is something which don't has to be transparent in a democracy. So this can be private. The same is for the private public. This was the agora, that was the marketplace in ancient Greek, that where people come together, that where you can buy and sell stuff, where you could make contracts, where you could talk, teach, playing sports, whatever. So where people coming together. But the thing is that there is this ecclesia, the public sphere, and this is where he calls the explicit power of a society is created. In the ancient Greek, that was that every full citizen were able to be there and to listen, to talk. So everybody was able to, yes, this is true. So I don't know, someone attacks one of our cities, how we should behave. Should we attack back? Should we defend? Should we give it up? And everybody was allowed to speak. Everybody was allowed to talk, to decide. So it was very organic, like we also do when we have a session like in Agile, when you have a problem, that all people are swarming together and thinking about the problem, and then they're doing the next step. In our democracies, currently, this doesn't happen that much. One of the worst examples, in my opinion, is the trading agreement, the TTIP. Who knew about the TTIP? It's quite some years ago already. It's 10 years ago, and that's the craziest thing which ever happened, actually, in my opinion. That was a trading agreement between United States and Europe, and it basically allowed corporations to overrule the local laws. So if a company said, yeah, but you promised me that I can sell my stuff on the market and now your law prohibits that, then you have to pay me. If you shut down all the nuclear reactors, you have to pay me. And that was giving up basically the autonomy of the state. So, and the really crazy thing is that this agreement was completely private. It was only allowed to be accessed by authorized negotiators, which were not even all of the parliamentarians. So a very limited amount of people were able to see what's going on in the agreement. Most of the people were from big corporations. And yeah, luckily that was getting leaked and making public by Greenpeace, and there was a huge shitstorm actually on this topic, and it got cancelled or freezed so far. There were a lot of agreements which were high problematic. But since then, I also need to say that the European Union changed a lot. So transparency and openness is something they are pushing and moving forward since 10 years. And that's pretty cool. Actually had a talk with one who is working at the European Commission this summer, and what he was talking about how they are working right now, that's really awesome. So they have open spaces and interacting with the stakeholders, and every law which is created can be viewed public, so you can go to the European Commission website and check what are the laws currently in production and how do you want to react to it. And also if they are, so when they are done, the laws, you still can give feedback how they are working in reality, and they can change the laws. So there's a lot of agility, if to say so. Okay, so we are done. That's the hard part. So basically we have the problem with the alienation, so that we do stuff which doesn't make sense, and with autonomy people are actually empowered to change that, and we need transparency to be able to do this on a big scale, on the whole society. You can also apply this, by the way, to organizations. So if you want to really have agile organizations, you need to think about what is the public sphere and how you can make the public sphere transparent. That doesn't mean that every team needs to be transparent, but it means that how you work together as a corporation, what needs to be public. And don't change this at once. Don't make a waterfall change, just as a note. Okay, so come back to the question. Should we eat beef, beans, or chocolate? And the answer is beans. No, that's a joke. The answer is that the question doesn't make sense. So the thing is that we do what we do, and if we realize that that doesn't make sense what we do, then we change it. And we should bring ourselves into a position that we are able to change if it doesn't make sense. If we have a climate crisis, then we should be able to react to this climate crisis and change it. And this is basically the idea of democracy, that you maximize this agile. So democracy is a habit. That is what Castoriadis is saying. That means that you need to practice the tools, the behavior, how you work, how you interact with people in a way that democracy is maximized. And as I said, that agile and democracy are very close together. That means that if you work agile, you also support democracy. And there are a lot of people, at least you should. So last thing, that even in Jung was talking about frameworks, and that's the same topic about in democracy. So most streams in democracy are talking about, should you have a parliament, should you have a president, should you have councils, should you have direct democracy, should you have representative democracy, and all this stuff. So they're talking about elements in the system and how they interact to each other. But when you check, like the presidential republic you have in the United States and in the Belarus, but when you look at the democracy index, which is, by the way, pretty nice stuff, then United States is a flawed democracy with close to 8 of 10 points, and Belarus is an authoritarian state with 2.59 out of 10 story points. Yeah, story points. Yeah. This is democracy points. That reminded me a lot of the frameworks we have in Agile. So it doesn't matter about the, of course, if you implement SAFe, the probability that you get to a great Agile environment is much less than if you implement like an unfixed model, even if it's not a framework or a method, as we heard today. But that's the way. You have to think about the process and not about the framework, not about the methodology. So in this case, be democratic,